the companies winning with AI aren't the ones with the biggest budgets. They're the ones who are starting right now. If you've been waiting for someone to cut through the noise and show you exactly how AI can transform your work, your wait is over. Your competitors have already signed up. I'm Kenny, founder of Brim and the host of the AI Opportunity. Welcome to the AI Opportunity. I'm really excited this week. We are joined by Rob Amor. Just to give the audience a bit of context, so Rob, you've led amazing projects and held senior roles in organizations like Farfetch and Tesco's and more recently, large e-commerce business Cambion. It's super exciting to have you on board. As you know, Rob, our audience are executives from across the world who are really grappling with what the hell do they do about AI? And so we're always honored to have people who have actually faced the same challenges and in many respects are those exact executives just on the other side of the table. So welcome, Rob. Excited to have you here.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the introduction.
Brilliant. So Rob, I think the whole world is excited about AI right now. What are your kind of high level thoughts about AI in terms of kind of what's happening in this space, how you've been thinking about it?
I think it's really exciting. I guess I've always seen it as like it can sort of augment people rather than just replace people. So I'm quite excited about how, tasks that previously were quite mundane and quite repetitive. I think those tasks are now, primed for technology like AI. So I think it can do a lot of good, even though there's obviously some negative press about it. But I see it in a positive light, and technology is always evolving, and this is obviously a major instrument in the technology world, and I just think this is another one that's going to accelerate how we work. But I think it's going to change the way we work in the same way the internet changed the way we work. If you can spend less time on some of the more repetitive tasks that are quite perhaps easy to do, and actually more time, possibly analyzing data or getting a bit more in depth into some of the details that really make a difference to, in my case, the customer, then I think that's a really positive thing.
No, so much you said that's super interesting and worth diving into. I guess one really sort of interesting framing question is that I said most recently you've held sort of COO roles and you've worked across, like I said, a range of different businesses, really mostly consumer, Farfetch, Tesco's, Cambion, as we mentioned. You've obviously had quite a long career in relative terms, right? You're a tenured professional. What have you seen over the last 5 years or so, and how the perspective around how technology is enabling businesses is changing? Because we're at an interesting point now, but the last 5 years, what does that transition look like for you versus say today and what you think is possible?
I think in terms of consumer, I think consumers' expectations are moving very quickly. I think consumers have higher expectations. I think big players like Amazon dictate the market in some ways. They frame how customers believe things should be. So, I'd say customer expectations on how quickly they get their products is now a really short time frame. But also, I think communicating to customers about, how you're going to do things. I think customer expectations in terms of communication is really important. So in terms of how things have changed in the last 5 years, I think just customers' expectations are a lot higher in terms of how a brand treats you and how you're communicated to. So even though I said like Amazon deliver very quickly, but I think equally, if a brand communicates to you that it's going to take 1.5 weeks, then customers accept that, but they expect that level of communication. And perhaps, customers expect you to put more of the right product in front of them than they used to be able to. So I think customer expectations are a bit higher than they used to be. And I think that's partly driven by technology and, how that's enabled brands to deliver more of what customers want.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I guess we're now in this kind of seminal moment where the world is being defined by consumer experiences around AI. What do you think that's going to do to your space and to the expectations of customers, really?
I think it will change, right? So I think, for example, bots have been around for quite a long time. And I'd say over the last year or two, people previously were sort of rubbishing bots, being like, oh, it's so frustrating, I hate them. Whereas I think there's a recognition over the last year or two that they actually have a place and they're actually significantly better than they used to be. I think people are sort of getting used to it. And essentially, customers, regardless of what industry you're in, as long as you can solve their problem as quickly as possible, that's the main thing they want, regardless of the technology. I think a customer is like, right, I want to speak to someone immediately because the bot hasn't got them to where they want to be. But I think, a customer can flip between those sorts of experiences. So I think you just have to adapt as a business. You have to offer more options. You have to offer them the opportunity to be able to solve it without speaking to someone. Because I think there's plenty of customers that don't want to speak to anyone anymore. They just want to solve it either by WhatsApp or without speaking to someone. So I think you just got to give more options. And, the way that brands do that is through technology.
That's a really nice framing, the way you're thinking about it, which is it's not technology for the sake of technology. It's where can this technology actually help the experience for the user? Where can it help the business? I think that seems to me to be where companies are seeing the most success. It's understanding it's a tool, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's where, again, when we go back to AI, it's obviously, I'm preaching to the choir probably to this audience, but you've got to think about what business problems you're trying to solve, rather than completely tech first. It's like what business problems do we face last year and this year, and how can AI or other technology help us solve those problems, rather than too excited about tech that's quite interesting and excited. It's like, does that solve our problem? Can it deliver us a better bottom line results in terms of driving revenue or producing better EBITDA?
Yeah, no, that seems spot on. And I think from all COOs across the world right now are going, yeah, that's exactly how companies should be thinking about AI in particular, like pragmatically. I guess on that note, maybe you could kind of walk us through some sort of early use cases where you've maybe seen some tangible results with AI, or at least you're working or have worked on where AI could help improve your function, but also the wider business.
Yeah, I think where I guess I sort of approached it as looking at what my teams were doing and how much time they were spending on different tasks. And obviously, I'd look at the tasks that they were spending a lot of time on. I'd also speak to the teams of like how repetitive they are, how interesting they find that task. So we would approach it from that respect, and then try and solve those repetitive tasks that, number one, the teams don't find very interesting, but also seem repetitive, so seem like they'd be perfect for an AI tool. So I guess one example would be that, where we want to communicate when products are going to be with customers, like we can automate that quite easily by sending that communication through to our customers. And so I think that was one good example where we're communicating to customers as they kind of want to be, and we're being proactive about it. I think another thing about customers is, they enjoy it when companies are proactive, so that you can say, this is when your product's going to be here. So again, I think that also helps the overall customer experience. It's internal and external, and I guess it's always thinking about how we can improve the customer experience.
That's super interesting. I think there's two themes there that I'd love to delve into a little bit more. The first one is actually about how you approached AI and people. So like, I've not really heard that much so far, that you actually went to your teams and it became a more of a collaborative exercise. Could you maybe double down on that a bit and explain to me and the audience, how did that actually work in practice? How did you deal with, like, I don't know, the emotions of staff and the fears, the concerns? That would be really helpful.
Getting people on board with when you want to change is really important. If you don't get people on board with change, then they're going to be very resistant to it. So I think being very open about why we were exploring AI and what the benefits would be, I think that was really important. And then also, like, I guess helping in some ways get the team to drive how we were going to drive that change was really important, because it means, they'll be more on board with being proactive about the change rather than it being a top-down decision. It was like, right, well, we've looked at your tasks. We're going to talk to you about the tasks that you've told us that you do and the amount of time you spent on it. These are the things that we think are going to be optimal in terms of trying to deliver. And I think by having that two-way collaboration, it makes the change that we're about to go on, which is pretty significant, makes it more likely that it's going to be delivered. So I think that was the idea of collaborating with different teams. And, with AI, it was also trying to explain to different teams why one department might have got priority over the other. Again, it's being very open about why we were doing things, and again, hoping that will land better. So that's why we went with that approach. It was change management approach and making it more likely to land.
That makes a lot of sense. I guess there's going to be executives all across the world listening to this now who are going to have certain team members who they just know are going to be worried about AI and AI potentially be undermining to their jobs and what have you. And those fears are real. AI does make businesses significantly more productive. How did you find dealing with that kind of emotional challenge, maybe that staff might have had, or that you might have had to navigate? Was that something you experienced as you kind of embedded AI in your organization?
Yeah, I think naturally people, again, I always like to treat people like they're very sensible, intelligent people. Again, you try and proactively say what you think their concerns are going to be, and they'll communicate to you exactly those concerns of like, why isn't this going to take my job? And I guess all you can say is like, well, the desire is this is what we're trying to do. We think this will mean that you'll have more time to do these other aspects of the role, which you're not getting time to do at the moment. So that's the idea of how we're trying to move forward. So I think, again, trying to frame it, but, also being open to say, look, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know how well this is going to work. I don't know how rapid this work is going to come through. So just being quite honest, and I guess treating everyone like adults, being, I may be the COO, but I don't know exactly how this is going to form. There's a lot of uncertainty about how quickly AI is going to be deployed, how quickly it's going to change the work landscape. So again, treating them like adults and being very honest about, not being sure how everything's going to go. So I think honesty and transparency, because I think without that you lose trust, and then you're going to lack the buy-in, I guess.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting how you almost tried to frame it to your teams about the opportunity for them to be able to do the more meaningful work. I presume the work that they were excited about, right? And
Yeah.
removing the work that was kind of monotonous and probably drudgery somewhat. So that sounds like a really compelling approach. And yeah, it's interesting, really, really interesting. Because I think that is an unseen worry that a lot of companies have right now, is that, okay, well, I might be excited by AI. I'm sure there are COOs, CEOs, CFOs all across the world now who are really keen to find ways to make a company more productive. But how do you deal with the people challenge, right? How do you make it fair and reasonable and bring people along? So I think that's really, really useful insight. And
So I liken it to, when I was a consultant, and before that, when I was working for Tesco, technology, it's always like a big change. So I think some of the approaches, aren't super different. So I think, like when you sort of embark on an ERP project in a big company, which is what I did when I was at Tesco, and what I did when I was a consultant, there's a lot of communication that needs to happen, that, this is a massive change. Those were like 2, 3, 4 year projects. Is it going to deliver everything straight away? Absolutely not. And that was something that was often communicated. It's like, it's not going to solve everything. In fact, there'll be times when it will feel like elements of the process move backwards, but eventually it will get better.
yeah, that's really interesting, because that realism, I think, at times feels a little bit missing from the current AI market, right? There's a lot of flashy things out there promising results within minutes, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Because the way you've described it, it's so measured and thoughtful about AI being a journey for large organizations. But we live in a very interesting moment, right, when it comes to many flashy technology tools.
Yeah, I think again, like, I was definitely part of this crowd. I thought, everything would move very quickly, but, you know, as much as I try and learn myself about technology, it's been a journey for me. Some things that you think are straightforward, like order confirmations and invoices, they are straightforward processes, but, we've got over 450 suppliers. There's nuances between how you communicate between those different suppliers. If someone's off one week, that might mean that the AI model that you've built doesn't quite work because someone sent something through in a slightly different way. So again, like, there's just nuances that you perhaps, whether it's the developer or whether it's me or whether it's the person that works for me, you've got to all work as a team to iron out those nuances. So I think, perhaps similar to some of the previous technology I've worked with, there's always stuff that you're going to need to iron out. And, to be fair to all the developers, they're learning, having to pick up these technologies that are super new. So, you've got to empathize with the developers, because obviously with the different tasks you're trying to solve, the important thing is trying to choose the right tool from a technology point to solve that problem. If that's changing week by week or month by month, that's a really tough world to have to work in.
That's hilarious. I laugh just because our audience isn't technical people, but being a technical person myself, I can relate. Rob, we've obviously previously worked together, so I love the empathy that you have for companies like ours, and the way the world is moving so fast. And no, that was really a really sage point that. AI is a journey. The companies that are out there promising that you just buy this tool, it makes everything magic. That's not the real world, right? I
No, I
mean,
don't.
what's your experience of that,
I'd agree. I guess, and I think the people that I listen to and the people I read about, the ones who are saying we're all learning here are the ones that I will listen to. The ones who say they figured it out and this is the way, this is the playbook of AI. I guess I'd probably be slightly cynical to those sorts of views because I think things are changing so quickly and the big companies are throwing so much money at it, that things you can't really be an expert. You have to be on this journey altogether, and you've got to be super interested and excited about it to keep up with things because things are changing so quickly. I mean, I've been trying to write agents myself, and I don't think I would have thought that only 6 months ago. So fact that you're getting to a point where, as a totally non-technical person, is able to vaguely write agents is amazing stuff.
Yeah, I mean that brings me on to the next point really, which is that it's amazing that you've got that level of intellectual curiosity and you're not scared about this fast change. You're actually thinking, can I deploy it? Can I help my businesses? And working with platforms that can enable that. Where do you think COOs are having common missteps when they think about adopting AI? Where do you think the slip ups are and the missteps?
I mean, obviously, I think it depends on what sort of organization you are, but I guess I think that if I'm going to be the person advocating AI across the organization, I need to be able to know enough to know what is possible. So I think it's a real positive thing to try and learn a little bit of the technology side because I think perhaps COOs and every C-suite level is going to need to be a bit more tech savvy than perhaps in the past. Um, because even the creative roles, there's a lot of upside to be able to use AI in the creative side. So previously you might say, "Oh, I'm a creative." Well, technology isn't as relevant, but these days it really is. But coming back to your point about where COOs and C-suites, I guess sitting back and waiting to see what happens, I don't think is a great approach. Like I guess, and that's perhaps one of my principles is that I think you've got to do things to learn quicker. I sort of align it with speaking a language. If you don't speak, you won't learn the language. You've got to make mistakes. You've got to try. And I'd sort of take that same approach with AI. Like you've got to be part of that journey of knowing, right, these are the tools that are evolving. These are the tools. This is what it's able to do. Otherwise, I think it's going to be difficult to lead your teams with credibility, because you'll be completely at their disposal. But also, I think you've got to be really inquisitive. So sort of be a kid a bit, and be curious about anything and ask stupid questions. So I think it's really important to be super curious and try and learn.
No, that's really, really, really interesting. I think there's one point in particular that I think is kind of an unknown insight that we don't hear a lot, which is if you're not clued up yourself as an executive, then you are at the whims of the wider team. And there is somewhat of a bit of a generational gap when it comes to AI, right? And, those employees are in their 20s and these they are very much AI native, right? Whether an organization wants it or not, they're already using AI.
Yeah.
You could call it shadow AI, right? If
Yes.
they're being trusted with their own computers and to do their own work, you can be sure the company's data, the company's private information is going into public AI. And
That's
so
it.
there is this risk, right, where if companies aren't leaning into AI, then they're effectively potentially being kind of beholden victims to
But
whatever the outcomes are, right?
again, that's about security, sort of making sure that people understand that if you just have a personal account rather than a business account, all your data's out there. So if someone's just been asked throwing spreadsheets into ChatGPT on a personal account, guess what? I'll be able to type in something and I'll get all this information, which I didn't think I'd be getting. I think again, it's about educating people about what is a safe way to use it. You know, throwing in spreadsheets into your personal account is not the safe way to do it. Make sure you're using a business account. So yeah, and again, I'm still learning about the security, and I think to some extent governments are still waiting to see like what the right rules are to implement. You know, and I think the US, UK all have very different approaches. So I think yeah, that's an interesting point about the shadow AI side of things.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's something we're increasingly seeing with clients is actually our whole positioning is about how do we help customers have control of their own AI, right? So it's in their own environment, they own it, they have auditability, they know what's happening, but still allowing customers to be able to use the best models, right? The best intelligence from the frontier providers like Anthropic, the open AIs,
Yeah,
etc. And so I think increasingly we're going to see that. We're going to see you'll have two camps. You'll have companies who are effectively doing nothing with AI, but they just don't realize it,
yeah,
right? Like you
yeah,
said. And then you'll have those companies who, their executives realize that actually this is in many respects, it's a challenge to leadership, right? They kind of have to meet that challenge.
yeah.
And they look at, okay, well, what does AI look like across our organization? And how can we wield this tool rather than potentially be a victim of this tool? It's kind of a bit of a binary outcome in many respects, I think, where we're heading. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, I obviously think that you have to be in it to sort of understand it, and you know, even the approach you take. I think I don't think there's a one size fits all approach to AI, but we've gone down quite a bespoke layer of AI. So we're using AI for specific parts of our process. Now, I think. Is that the right approach? Have we tried to replicate a process that could have been better? And then you start applying the technology. Whereas I think at the moment, a lot of companies will be applying AI to an existing process. It may not be a good existing process because it's been the same way for a long time. So, like, should you be reevaluating a process and then applying technology, or just be applying it to an as-is process? I think I'm leaning towards actually you should. I think the business side and the technology side need to be working closer together going forward. So, like, if I was thinking it in the future, like it'd be helpful to know from my developers and my technology team, how is this going to be a best process taking into account technology as well as business process? Because there'll be compromises on both sides, and that's just the whole technology process, isn't it? Trying to figure it out. But I think working even closer together going forward is the way I think things could work better.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I couldn't disagree with you at all because I think it's entirely correct. I think one of the challenges we see from a lot of companies is, like you say, maybe the process that they're trying to enable with AI is not quite right. And currently the process is set up in such a way because they have resource constraints, right? Not enough people to do it, or not enough capital sometimes because maybe it's an expensive process. And trying to just kind of tag AI onto that process, you get some benefits, but
Mm.
actually, like you say, the opportunity is sometimes a forcing function to rethink, well, what do we actually want to do? It's a 5-minute process, not a 8-hour process,
Yeah,
because things are now, there's more possible now, right?
yeah, and it's really difficult because I always try to look at it from the company that's trying to help us, but also from our point of view. So I think that the friction is that you've got companies that are saying we want ROI really quickly. Like if we're going to implement AI, I want to know when the result's going to be. So the tendency will be from an AI company point of view is like we'll just get on and replicate that process because redoing a quite embedded process does take a bit of time.
Yeah.
So then it will be like, you have a board that's possibly challenging, like, how's AI going? It's like, oh, we're rewriting the existing process. It's like, oh, well, that's not quick enough. So I think there's another thing that perhaps people need to learn is a balance between speed and patience. Like, don't go into it too quickly because it might end up costing you more time.
Yeah.
So I think that's a friction that what I've found is helpful is just being very open with who we're working with and saying this is what we're trying to do,
Yeah.
and also saying where I think things aren't going well, but also I always invite the people I'm working with to say, well, where aren't we doing things correctly? Do we keep shifting the goalposts? Like we said we were going to do this box, and now we're doing this massive box, scope creep, which again, like it can happen, right? Again, if you're trying to deliver something quickly, you perhaps feel like, oh, it's quicker just to do it than to sort of say, look, we're changing the process again. So that means the date that we wanted to deliver this is going to move back. And then there's the frustrations. It's a friction that needs to be solved, and being respectful of each other and what each other's trying to deliver, but also being open where your own team isn't quite doing what they say they're going to do. So you don't want to make it too political, having too many layers involved, but you also want to make sure things are moving along. So in that respect, then I do think it is important to have multiple stakeholders involved.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, there's so much value from what you said that I want to pull out a few of the points for executives. So I think one of the things that you said is really that companies should be thinking about AI as a long-term investment, right? It's
Yeah.
not just about where are the quick wins. It's actually about the long term. And it's something that we see a lot now with customers is customers, when we work with them, they're often looking at what does their margin, for example, look like in year 1, year 2, year 3, because if we're brutally honest, a big driver of AI is improving the economics of a business, right? That's
Sure.
ultimately what it comes down to.
Sure.
And being able to project, especially for CFOs and the whole C-suite team, what does margin expansion look like as we make ourselves more efficient? That is what we've seen from customers when they've really seen it, like you say, from a patient perspective. They see it as a 1, 2, 3 year investment, so that the other side they're maybe 20-30% more profitable, which what business doesn't want that? Right.
Yeah.
But like you said, the challenge there though is that, like, well, how do you go on that journey? Who owns it in the organization? If everyone in the C-suite has got an opinion on what happens, what's done. And one of the things that we've seen is the best way we've seen it so far, and like you say, everyone's learning this space, is actually one team member being kind of sponsored as like the AI champion. And
Yeah.
they kind of act as an interface between companies like us and the client. And that has, from our perspective, been really kind of valuable, because what they can do is they can bring in the relevant stakeholders into the relevant conversations, but you're not necessarily speaking to the executive team all the time, right? Which is impractical for a lot of organizations. Is that sort of the direction of what you're suggesting, or?
Talking about some of the ERP projects that I did when I was a consultant, you'd have change champions, wouldn't you? That sort of really sort of communicating to the teams how the organization is going to change, how the process is going to change. I see it the same with AI. I think you need someone who's excited about AI. So I have sort of AI champions within different departments that sort of are championing the change. They're sort of talking to the developer to say where things are working and where things aren't working. And I think by them working with the developer, they start to understand what the technology can do. And it means that then sometimes they're able to solve some of the problems on their own. So stuff like, if an email comes in and they know the model knows to look out for an attachment, but that attachment isn't there. Right, I can solve that myself. I can add the attachment and then the AI agent will work. So I definitely think that having AI champions within the organization is really important, because again, it's about that understanding about how the technology is working. I think without that, things just move slowly, and then you'll lose some of the buy-in from the departments, which is really important to deployment.
Yeah.
And if that client AI champion is sort of saying this is why things are slow, but we can see how we're going to overcome this. That's I think more effective than perhaps the AI company sort of saying, "Oh, we'll sort it out." I think it's really important.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Having that internal voice that can kind of give clarity on what's going on, right? I appreciate you're a busy man and I've stolen a lot of your time already, but just to kind of move towards the end of the conversation, if you were to advise COOs or give your own perspective, and you're a COO for the first time trying to implement an AI project, what sort of 3 things do you think that you must get right, you must be thinking about? Any sort of frameworks?
I think be very clear about what business problems you're trying to solve. That's really important. Be realistic with how quickly things will be deployed and make sure that's communicated upwards and downwards. Having that buy-in from the departments and the people that you're going to deploy it with is really important. Transparency is really important between both the people that you're deploying it with, plus the company that you're working with. Um, I think those points are really important for it to be successful.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's amazing. And it's just really highly practical, which I think the world is desperate for right now. I think most executives right now are just scratching their heads and going, well, what can we do and how do we do it?
I think also just be open to being wrong, right? So you and I might sort of say, right, this is the way that we're going to do it, and then we'll get down a bit further road, and then it will be clear something's not working, and then try something else. You've got to be iterative with this stuff. You've got to sort of acknowledge when things aren't quite going to plan, and how can we do things differently.
No, it's really interesting. And I think what's really come out of this conversation around the way you've talked about the pragmatism and the timeline of AI is that there are no magic bullets, right? It's not like you could just buy something off the shelf and go, okay, it's perfect. You've got to be on a journey. How have you
Yeah.
found that actually? Obviously, you've worked with companies like ourselves, Rob. How have you found that interface with working with AI companies like Brim and the broad experience?
Yeah, I mean, I enjoy it, and again, I think communication and transparency is super important. I think you've got to work with AI companies that align with your culture. We tend to move quite quickly, so we appreciated like deployments happening every week, and we'd have communication every week. Other companies might find, leaving a process for 2 to 4 weeks is a better way to do things, because then at least the scope remains quite defined. But I'm enjoying it because, I think AI isn't going away. AI is here to stay, and it is going to change the way we work. The more you can learn about the positives and negatives of implementing AI, I think the further along we will be, and probably have a competitive edge over other companies.
That seems to be a motivation there, right? Is that there's an opportunity there for companies to actually have an edge by leaning into technology now rather than in 10 years time when that ship has sailed in many respects, right?
I think I agree. Yeah, it will be difficult to catch up with like 1.5, 2 years of a company that's really active in trying to learn about AI. I think then you'll be slightly beholden to taking something possibly off the shelf that isn't quite the right fit.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And just to wrap up, quick fire questions we're heading into now. The first question is, what do you think the biggest opportunity in AI is right now? Very big question.
Yeah, that's a very big question. There's just so many opportunities. It's difficult to pinpoint one, because I sort of think of it, from a C-suite level. Is it efficiencies? Is it growth? See, I think it can attack both. I wrote an agent the other day that can push out a reasonably good article, and then on the efficiency side, I know that it can streamline some quite arduous process. So I think there's such a big opportunity. I don't know if I can pinpoint exactly what it is. But I
So
guess you're trying
everything,
to say,
it says everything.
what would I put my money on? But yeah, I think it can just help every facet of the organization. Yeah, I think the opportunity is huge.
No, that's honest, and I think exactly what the audience wants to hear. And then if you were to give leaders like yourself from companies across the world sort of one short piece of advice when going into this new era, what would that be?
I'd be very clear about what you want to get out of it, and the expectations you have. And then when working with AI, make sure that you're tracking it and figuring out where things are going well and where things are going wrong. So you can again iterate, like I say. So I think it's been very clear on what you're trying to solve, and setting quite clear expectations.
Yeah, brilliant. I think that's really useful and pragmatic. And then wrapping up, one final question. Could you give the audience any sort of recommendations of sort of books or podcasts or mental models that you feel have really shaped your leadership and how you think about not just AI, but leading technology?
Well, I guess I said it earlier. I think be quite childish about how to approach AI, and just be really interested in how things are evolving, because things are changing so quickly. I've got two children who are 5 and 3. They sort of find everything fascinating. So I think having that same sort of kiddie curiosity to AI I think, is really important. I think it's intellectually quite stimulating, thinking about how these different things can solve some of the business problems. And obviously not all of the new releases or the new news will, but one of the new releases will help you solve a business problem that you have.
Awesome. I think that's perfectly framed. Childlike curiosity.
I think
That's the
so.
best piece of advice. And yeah, just understand that it's a journey, right? Like companies are going on these journeys and you've got to stay curious. I love that.
Yeah, I think curiosity, and then pulling it back to perhaps something more COO like structured. So sort of they've been very clear about what you're trying to solve and what expectations. So yeah, there's a bit of both there.
Brilliant. Well, look, thank you so much, Rob. I've had so much fun. I think this has been really awesome. And as I said at the start, we're really trying to create a forum where, leaders like yourself from across the world can kind of filter out the truth from the kind of hype. And
Yeah.
I think this has been super, super helpful. I hope you've enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, I look forward to seeing what other people have to say in the future podcast. So.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us, Rob. And yeah, it's been awesome. All the best. Take care,
All
Rob.
right, thanks very much.